The evening sun cast long shadows through the tall windows of Silver Leaf Restaurant, where soft classical music drifted through the air like a gentle breeze. Maya cleared another table, her movements quick but careful as she gathered the white linen napkins and sparkling silverware. The restaurant buzzed with the usual dinner crowd. Business people in sharp suits, couples celebrating special moments, and regular customers who'd become familiar faces over the years. As she worked, Maya caught herself quietly humming along to the Mozart piece playing overhead. She quickly stopped, pressing her lips together in a thin line. Old habits died hard, even after 3 years of trying to build a new life. The music always pulled at something deep inside her, like an old friend calling her name. The weight of the dining plates in her hands kept her grounded in reality as she made her way back to the kitchen. Steam billowed out as the doors swung open, carrying the rich aromas of Chef Wong's famous roasted duck and garlic-sautéed vegetables. Table 7's cleared. She called out to Raj, the buzzboy who'd become like a little brother to her. He flashed her a quick smile before disappearing into the controlled chaos of the kitchen. Maya paused at the service station to refill her water pitcher, catching a glimpse of herself in the mirrored wall. Her dark hair was neatly pulled back in a practical bun, her black uniform pressed and spotless, the perfect image of a professional server. Nobody looking at her would guess that her fingers itched to dance across piano keys instead of carrying plates, or that she once knew every note of the concerto currently playing overhead. The grand piano in the corner caught her eye, as it did every evening. It sat there like a sleeping giant, covered in its heavy velvet cloth, waiting for the weekend when some local musician would come to provide entertainment for the guests. Maya remembered how different pianos had their own personalities, some bright and bold, others warm and mellow. She wondered what kind of voice this one had, but pushed the thought away. That part of her life was safely packed away in boxes under her bed, along with the old concert programs and competition medals. "Maya, your new table's been waiting for 5 minutes," called out Nicole, the floor manager, snapping her back to reality. Maya quickly grabbed her order pad and headed to the table, putting on her warm professional smile. The group seated there radiated money and influence. Designer clothes, expensive watches, that particular air of people used to getting their way. Maya had learned to read customers quickly in this job, and something about their slightly too loud laughter made her wary. As she approached their table, she couldn't help but notice that one of them kept glancing at the piano. There was something knowing in his expression that made her stomach tighten just a little. Still, she stepped forward with practiced ease, ready to recite the evening specials. This was her life now, simple, steady, safe. She had made peace with it, or at least that's what she told herself as she pushed away the phantom feeling of ivory keys beneath her fingertips. The crystal glasses clinked gently as she filled them with water, the sound mixing with the classical music that never stopped playing. Just another ordinary evening at the Silver Leaf, or at least that's what Maya thought. She had no way of knowing that this particular group of customers was about to turn her carefully constructed world upside down. The front doors of the Silver Leaf swung open, letting in a burst of cool evening air and loud laughter. Maya looked up from arranging silverware to see a group of well-dressed people making their entrance. They moved with that particular confidence that came from being used to the finest things in life. Their voices carried across the restaurant, just a touch too loud for the elegant setting. "Right this way, please," the hostess guided them to a prime table in the center of the dining room. Maya recognized a few faces from previous visits. They were regulars who always left decent tips, but had a reputation among the staff for being demanding and sometimes a bit cruel with their comments. One man caught her attention. He wasn't a regular, and something about him seemed different from the others. While they were all dressed expensively, he carried himself with a quieter sort of authority. His silver hair was neatly trimmed, and he wore wire-rimmed glasses that he kept adjusting as he studied the room. Maya noticed how his eyes lingered on the grand piano in the corner, showing more interest in the instrument than the usual customers ever did. "That's your section. Nicole whispered as she passed by with a stack of menus. They'd just come from the Arts Foundation fundraiser at the Riverside Hotel. Already had quite a few drinks there, from what I heard. She gave Maya a meaningful look that said, "Be careful." Maya took a deep breath and straightened her apron. The group had pushed together 2 tables without asking, their laughter getting louder as they settled in. She could hear snippets of their conversation as she approached. Something about a boring speech at the fundraiser and how they needed some real entertainment. "Good evening." Maya greeted them with her professional smile. "Welcome to the Silver Leaf." She began filling their water glasses, trying not to react when one woman loudly complained about the temperature of the water without even tasting it. "Oh look, it's the same waitress from last time," another woman said, her voice carrying that particular tone that suggested she was talking about Maya rather than to her. "Don't you remember? The one who mixed up Tom's order." Maya kept her face neutral. She hadn't mixed up any orders. The man had changed his mind halfway through the meal and then acted as if it had been her mistake. But in this business, the customer was always right, even when they weren't. The silver-haired man she hadn't seen before was studying the wine list, but she noticed how he kept glancing at the piano. She learned his name was Dr. Chen when another guest addressed him, talking about some student performances. Maya's heart skipped a beat as she realized he must be connected to the music world, but she kept her expression carefully blank as she took their drink orders. "The usual for everyone," one man asked loudly. "And maybe some entertainment while we wait?" He looked around the room with an exaggerated motion. "This place could use a little livening up, don't you think?" A few of them turned their attention to the piano, and Maya felt a familiar knot forming in her stomach. Something in their expressions made her uneasy. That particular look people get when they're about to have what they think is fun at someone else's expense. "We should have some music," someone declared. "It's Friday night, after all." They all nodded in agreement, but Maya could sense there was more coming. The way they glanced between her and the piano made her nervous. These weren't the usual requests for weekend entertainment. There was something else brewing. As Maya turned to put in their drink orders, she heard them whispering and laughing behind her. Years of experience had taught her that whenever customers started whispering and laughing while looking at their server, something uncomfortable was about to happen. She just didn't know yet how this particular evening would change everything she'd carefully built over the past 3 years. Maya returned to the table balancing a tray of expensive cocktails and wine. She could feel something had shifted in the atmosphere while she was gone. The group's laughter had taken on an edge that made her even more uneasy than before. As she carefully placed each drink in front of its owner, one of the women touched her arm to get her attention. "Tell me," the woman said, her voice sweet but her eyes sharp, "don't you ever get bored just carrying plates around?" The others at the table leaned in, like audience members waiting for the next act of a show to begin. Maya kept her professional smile in place. "I enjoy my work," she answered simply, continuing to distribute the drinks. But they weren't done with her yet. "That piano looks so lonely over there," said one of the men, swirling his scotch. "Such a shame to see it just sitting there collecting dust." He turned to Dr. Chen. "Don't you agree? You're the expert after all." Dr. Chen adjusted his glasses, looking slightly uncomfortable. "It's a fine instrument," he said quietly. "Steinway Model B, if I'm not mistaken. Perfect for this space. You know what would be fun?" Another man spoke up, his voice carrying across the restaurant. "If our waitress here gave us a little performance." He gestured toward Maya with his drink, some of it sloshing over the edge. Maya's hands tightened on her serving tray. She could feel other diners starting to look their way. "I'm sorry, but I'm not allowed to play the piano. It's reserved for our weekend performers," she said firmly, trying to steer the conversation back to their dinner orders. "Oh, come on," the first woman pressed. "We're your best customers. Surely you can make an exception." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Unless, of course, you don't know how to play." The rest of the group joined in, their voices getting louder. Yes, entertain us. Show us what you can do. Don't be shy. They were drawing even more attention now, and Maya could see Nicole, the floor manager, watching worriedly from across the room. I really should check on your appetizers. Maya tried to step away, but one of the men stood up, blocking her path. He was perfectly polite about it, but the message was clear. They weren't going to let this go. Tell you what, he said, pulling out his wallet. $500 if you play something for us right now. He placed 5 crisp $100 bills on the table. Consider it a generous tip. Maya felt her face growing hot. She could see other servers watching, could feel the weight of everyone's attention. The money sat there like a challenge, but it wasn't about the money. It was about power. They were trying to make her dance for their amusement, like a street performer begging for coins. Dr. Chen cleared his throat. Perhaps we should let her do her job, he suggested, but his voice was drowned out by the others. What's wrong? Too good to entertain us, one of them called out. Or maybe not good enough. The words stung, hitting too close to the life she'd left behind. Maya stood there, frozen between her past and present. The classical music playing softly through the restaurant speakers seemed to mock her now. Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, a piece she used to know by heart. Her fingers twitched at her sides, muscle memory fighting with her determination to keep that part of her life locked away. But as the group's taunts continued and other diners started to whisper, something shifted inside her. 3 years of hiding, of pretending to be less than she was, of carefully building walls around her heart. And for what? To let these people make her feel small anyway? The piano seemed to call to her from across the room. In that moment, Maya realized she had 2 choices. She could walk away and let them think they'd won, or she could show them exactly who they were trying to humiliate. Her heart pounded as she made her decision. Time seemed to slow down as Maya stood there, the group's laughter fading into background noise. Her eyes drifted to the piano again, and suddenly she was lost in memories. She remembered the smell of polish on wooden keys, the weight of her competition dress, and her mother's warm hands adjusting her hair bow before each performance. The memory of her last concert hit her like a physical thing. It had been a charity event, much like the one these people had just attended. She had played Rachmaninoff that night, her fingers flying across the keys with the kind of confidence that came from thousands of hours of practice. That was the evening she got the call about her parents' accident. Life had changed so quickly after that. Her younger brother was only 12, her sister 14. They needed more than just a big sister who could play piano. They needed someone to cook meals, help with homework, pay bills, and keep their family together. So she had done what she had to do. She withdrew from music school, packed away her dreams along with her sheet music, and found a steady job waiting tables. Maya's hands trembled slightly as she looked at the $500 still sitting on the table. One of the women was whispering to her friend, not bothering to hide her smirk. Bet she doesn't even know which end of the piano to sit at. The comment sparked something in Maya's chest, not anger exactly, but a sudden clarity. She thought about her siblings, now in college themselves. Her brother had just made the dean's list, and her sister was studying engineering. They had grown into amazing young adults, partly because she had shown them that sometimes being strong meant making hard choices. But maybe, she realized, being strong could also mean choosing to stop hiding. Nicole appeared at her side, sensing the tension. Maya, you don't have to do this. I can ask them to leave if they're harassing you. Her manager's voice was low and concerned. Maya touched her friend's arm gently. It's okay, she said, surprising herself with how steady her voice was. Actually, I think I will play something. The group fell silent, clearly not expecting this response. Dr. Chen sat up straighter, his expression changing from embarrassment to curiosity. Maya untied her apron and handed it to Nicole. Her heart was pounding, but her steps were sure as she walked toward the piano. She hadn't touched a piano in 3 years, but as she carefully lifted the heavy velvet cover, her fingers remembered. They remembered everything. The walk to the piano bench felt like walking through her past the practice rooms where she spent countless hours, past the competition stages where she had earned standing ovations, past the moment she had carefully packed away this essential part of herself. As she sat down, adjusting the bench with the automatic movements of someone who had done this thousands of times, she could hear the murmurs of surprise from the group's table. The familiar cool touch of the keys under her fingers brought tears to her eyes, but she blinked them away. This wasn't about them anymore. This wasn't about their cruel joke or their $500. This was about the girl who had given up her dreams but never lost them. This was about music that had been waiting patiently in her heart for 3 years, like a letter waiting to be opened. Maya took a deep breath and placed her hands on the keys. In that moment, she wasn't just a waitress about to prove someone wrong. She was every person who had ever set aside their passion for responsibility, every dreamer who had locked away their gifts for practical reasons. But most importantly, she was herself, completely and fully, for the first time in 3 years. Her fingers hovered over the keys for just a moment. Then, with the clarity of someone waking from a long sleep, she knew exactly what she wanted to play. The restaurant fell silent as Maya's fingers touched the keys. The first notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor floated through the air like drops of rain, gentle at first, then building into something more powerful. She had chosen this piece carefully. It was a story of transformation, of beauty born from challenge, and right now, it was her story too. The group that had tried to embarrass her sat frozen, their drinks forgotten in their hands. Dr. Chen's eyes widened behind his glasses as he recognized not just the piece, but the touch of someone who understood its soul. This wasn't a waitress playing at being a musician. This was an artist reclaiming her voice. Maya felt the familiar warmth spread through her chest as the music flowed from her fingers. How has she survived so long without this? The piece built gradually, like a flower opening its petals to the sun. Her body swayed slightly with the rhythm, memories of countless hours at the piano rushing back as if they had never left. In the kitchen, the cooks stopped their work, drawn by the music floating through the service doors. Raj, the young busboy, peeked out with wide eyes, watching the transformation of his usually quiet coworker. Even the customers who had been complaining about their wine temperatures moments ago sat in stunned silence, their forks hovering halfway to their mouths. As the piece progressed, Maya's confidence grew stronger. Her fingers danced across the keys in the fast passages, telling a story of triumph over adversity. The notes rang out clear and true, filling every corner of the restaurant with their magic. This wasn't just muscle memory. This was her heart speaking through the music. The woman who had smirked earlier now sat with her hand over her mouth, tears gathering in her eyes. Dr. Chen had closed his eyes, his head nodding slightly with each perfectly executed phrase. The rest of their group sat in various states of amazement and shame, their cruel joke forgotten in the face of true artistry. Other diners had put down their utensils, completely captivated. An elderly couple held hands across their table, smiling at memories the music stirred in their hearts. A young girl tugged at her mother's sleeve, pointing at Maya with wonder in her eyes. The piece built toward its climax, Maya's fingers flying across the keys with the kind of precision that only comes from years of dedicated practice. Each note was perfect, each phrase shaped with deep understanding. The piano, which had sat quietly in the corner for so long, sang under her touch as if it had been waiting just for her. Nicole stood by the hostess station, her eyes glistening with tears. She had known Maya for 3 years, but was seeing her for the first time. The restaurant's regular pianist, who had just arrived for his weekend performance, stood in the doorway with his mouth slightly open, recognizing mastery when he heard it. As Maya approached the final passages, she felt lighter than she had in years. The music poured out of her like a river breaking through a dam, carrying away the weight of pretending to be less than she was. Her fingers struck the final chords with confidence and grace, letting them ring out in the perfect acoustics of the room. For a moment after the last note faded, there was absolute silence. It was the kind of silence that happens when people are afraid to breathe, afraid to break the spell that has fallen over them. Maya sat still at the piano, her hands resting gently on the keys, her heart pounding in her chest. The silence lasted for what felt like forever and no time at all. Then, somewhere in the back of the restaurant, someone started to clap. The sound was quickly joined by others, building into a wave of applause that washed over the entire room. People began to stand, first a few, then entire tables, until the whole restaurant was on its feet. The applause seemed to go on forever, filling the restaurant with waves of appreciation and awe. Maya finally opened her eyes, overwhelmed by the standing ovation before her. Every person in the restaurant was on their feet, from the wealthy couples by the windows to the kitchen staff peering through the service doors. Some were wiping tears from their eyes, while others were smiling with pure joy. Dr. Chen was the first to approach the piano. His hands were trembling slightly as he adjusted his glasses, looking at Maya with newfound respect and what appeared to be regret. That was, he paused, searching for the right words. That was extraordinary. Your interpretation of Chopin. I haven't heard anything like it since I attended the international piano competition in Warsaw last year. The rest of his group hung back, their earlier arrogance replaced by evident shame. The woman who had made the snide comments earlier dabbed at her eyes with an expensive napkin, her makeup slightly smudged. The man who had offered the $500 looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. Where did you study? Dr. Chen asked softly, his expert's curiosity evident in his voice. Your technique, your understanding of the emotional depth of the piece. Maya's hands were still resting on the keys, feeling the familiar smooth ivory beneath her fingers. Juilliard, she said quietly, speaking the name for the first time in 3 years. I was in my final year when... She trailed off, but Dr. Chen nodded in understanding. An elderly couple approached the piano, the woman holding her husband's arm for support. My dear, the woman said, her voice thick with emotion, you made me remember our first dance. We had our wedding reception in a place just like this, and they played Chopin too. Her husband squeezed her hand, nodding in agreement. The young girl who had been watching with wide eyes tugged away from her mother and ran up to the piano. Can you teach me? She asked excitedly. I just started piano lessons, but I want to play like you. Her mother hurried over, apologizing for the interruption, but Maya just smiled, remembering her own childhood enthusiasm. Nickel appeared at Maya's side, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. Why didn't you ever tell us? She asked, but her tone held no judgment, only wonder. The other servers gathered around, seeing their colleague in a completely new light. I couldn't, Maya explained, her voice soft but steady. After my parents' accident, my siblings needed me. Music? She touched the keys gently. Music had to wait. Dr. Chen cleared his throat. I'm the director of the city's music conservatory, he said, and Maya's heart skipped a beat. We've been looking for someone to teach our advanced students, someone who not only has the technical skills, but the emotional depth to inspire young musicians. He pulled out a business card from his wallet. The position would include access to our performance hall for your own practice and concerts. The restaurant had fallen quiet again, everyone listening to this exchange. The other members of his group, perhaps trying to make amends, began nodding enthusiastically at his words. Maya looked around the room, at the smiling faces of her co-workers, at the inspired young girl, at the elderly couple still lost in their memories, at Dr. Chen holding out his card like a key to a door she thought had closed forever. The weight of the past 3 years seemed to lift from her shoulders, replaced by a feeling of possibility she had almost forgotten. The piano keys under her fingers felt like old friends welcoming her home. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to really feel it. The joy, the passion, the pure love of music that had been part of her soul since childhood. Maybe, she realized, some dreams don't die when we set them aside. Maybe they just wait patiently for the right moment to bloom again. The restaurant had transformed into something magical that evening. The usual dining atmosphere had given way to an almost concert hall feeling, with people still wiping tears from their eyes and talking in excited whispers. Maya sat at the piano, Dr. Chen's business card in her trembling hands, as more people came up to express their appreciation. "Would you?" Dr. Chen hesitated, then continued with growing enthusiasm. "Would you consider playing one more piece? Something of your choosing?" The request was gentle, nothing like the demanding tone from earlier. The other diners murmured in agreement, their faces hopeful. Maya looked at Nicole, who immediately understood. "Take all the time you need," her manager said with a warm smile. "Your tables are covered." The other servers nodded eagerly, already redistributing her section among themselves. Turning back to the keys, Maya chose Debussy's Clair de Lune. As the first ethereal notes filled the air, she caught sight of Raj recording the performance on his phone. "For your brother and sister," he whispered when he saw her notice. "They should see this." The piece floated through the restaurant like moonlight on water. This time, Maya played with her eyes open, watching the effect her music had on the people around her. The young girl who had asked for lessons sat cross-legged on the floor near the piano, completely mesmerized. Her mother had stopped trying to make her return to their table, understanding that her daughter was witnessing something important. As she played, Maya thought about the strange turns life could take. Just hours ago, she had been worried about drink orders and table settings. Now she was reconnecting with a part of herself she thought she'd lost forever. The cruel joke meant to humiliate her had instead set her free. The group that had started it all sat quietly at their table, their expressions a mix of awe and regret. The man who had offered the $500 stood up and walked to the piano between movements. Silently, he placed not just the promised money, but several more $100 bills beside her on the piano. This time, it wasn't a bribe or a challenge. It was a gesture of respect. When the final notes of Clair de Lune faded away, Dr. Chen approached again. "The conservatory position," he said, "includes flexible hours. You could start part-time if you wish, continue working here if that's what you want. We would be honored to have you join us on your own terms." The elderly couple who had been reminded of their wedding day came forward. "We host a monthly music salon at our home," the woman said, pressing a card into Maya's hand. "Please, consider being our guest performer next month. We would love to share your gift with our friends." More opportunities began pouring in. A mother asked about private lessons for her children. A local church needed a pianist for their holiday concerts. The restaurant's owner, who had come out from his office after hearing about the performance, offered her a regular weekend spot at the piano. Maya felt tears welling up in her eyes, but this time they were tears of joy. She pulled out her phone and scrolled to her brother's number. He would be finishing his evening class soon. Her sister would be in her dorm room, probably studying for her engineering finals. They had all sacrificed so much over the past 3 years, supporting each other through the hard times. Looking around the restaurant one more time, Maya saw not just opportunities, but possibilities. The piano that had been covered and quiet in the corner now seemed to shine in the gentle lighting. The keys beneath her fingers felt like they were welcoming her home. As she dialed her brother's number, Maya realized that sometimes life's cruelest moments can lead to its greatest gifts. She had needed these 3 years, not just to take care of her family, but to understand that being strong meant being true to all parts of herself. The music had never really left her. It had just been waiting for the right moment to play again. The phone rang, and Maya smiled, knowing exactly what she would say. "Hey, little brother, remember how you always asked why I stopped playing? Well, you'll never believe what happened tonight."